On this lens there are 4 screw holes at the back. 2 of them are fairly close together. I always start there. That's where the open side of the shim runs, so it's a convenient place to have it aligned. So I just start these screws. I don't run them down all the way, otherwise you'll start binding into things you don't want to bind into. And these are just help me with aligning the lens as I put it back together. You can do without them. I only use 3 of these, by the way, even though there are 4 holes. I only bother using 3 screws. That's more than enough to help me line things up. Our shim has a slight indentation at this point. That's effectively put a little bit of a buckle into this, so it's not lying as flat as it should. So I'm going to carefully make sure I get this dead flat. Yes, that appears to be the problem, because now my depth of field pointer levers spring back correctly. I'm holding this firmly together with finger and thumb. Let's roll that round to where you can see the depth of field indicators. And they should be symmetrical about the centre at that point. Have another look. They should be symmetrical. If one is much closer than the other, it means that you've got the timing of the 2 depth of field pointers 1 tooth out, and it would need to be reorganised correctly. So I'll put a screw in the back here in the one position we don't have a post. Run that down lightly. Unscrew the post from the position opposite. And pop the correct screw in there. Now it's stable. Now that can't fall apart. That's ideal. I can remove other 2 posts. And we have 2 screws. One is plain, the other one has red paint on it. So we'll put the red painted one back where the red painted one came from. And it even still retains most of its red paint after all of that. The other screw, get that started. All the screws are started and home. I can go around and tighten them up. So that's the main body all finished with. Rangefinder coupling cam revolves in the base, visible through the slot there as the lens is turned. Now I need to turn our attention to this piece, and I've already determined that the diaphragm in here is clean, and I'm happy with the state of that. It's not unduly oily or sticky or showing any other faults. Really, we've only got to deal with the focus threads. To deal with the focus threads, we just need to use some naphtha on a cotton bud and wipe that thread out completely on the inside there. You can do this multiple times until the cotton bud is coming away quite clean. And here we're interested in removing the old grease, which will have gone sticky with age. It just goes to a waxy state, quite sticky. And we need to do the piece on the front here that runs on. This is a multi-start thread. being brass, it's subject to corrosion if it gets moisture on it. If it's not protected with oil at the time, oil and grease, it may well corrode up, and what tends to happen then is it's just rough. It's not that it won't move, it's just that it doesn't move smoothly. So I'm just starting this lens on the thread. Multi-start threads are always entertaining to get started, and there I'm just running it up and down, just getting a feel for the how clean that thread is. I'm just going to run a little bit of naphtha in there. I'm being reasonably careful not to let this run down into the diaphragm because I don't want to have to swab that for hours. And I'm working this backwards and forwards. In doing this, the two brass surfaces will rub off any very fine oxidisation or corrosion. And I can wipe those threaded sections out. Check them again. And they should feel noticeably smoother, and they do. That's good. That's fairly well advanced now. Let's have a look at the rest of the state of this. Now you'll probably see some corrosion marks in here. That's a clear fingerprint. It means that somebody, when they were assembling the lens, put their finger on that part and it's left a fingerprint embossed in their metal surface. That doesn't cause us any problems. It's just something that's, you could say it's something that's worth avoiding. That's good. That piece is done. What do I want to do with this? A little lubrication wouldn't hurt. I want to put some grease in there. I've got some synthetic grease here, and typically I just want to run a spot on the thread at multiple places around the outside. Given that it's a very short thread, it's multi-start thread, I want a dot in lots of places, perhaps 3/4 of an inch apart, 19 millimeters, thereabouts. Very little is required, that's good. Yeah, just little dots of grease. Just running that in. As I worked that backwards and forwards, I felt quite a marked change. There's a little bit of roughness at first. That grease has distributed itself evenly. Now it's smooth. There's a smooth, even drag to it, I suppose you could say. That's good. That's a good feel. That can go there. Turn our attention to the glass. Our rear piece appears to be a single piece of glass. The outer surface is quite dirty, the inner surface is clean. Our front section, we have a small element at the rear which may or may not come out with a friction tool. I'll try another one shortly. At the front, well, that's our setting ring, isn't it? I'll see if I can get that rear piece loose. Right, try this friction tool. Yes, that's come loose. Okay, so that's just a retainer. I'm looking closely at this rear piece of glass now. This surface is pretty much flat, and to make sure I don't bugger this up and end up putting it in back to front, I'm going to put a dot on the edge of that I can find. With a Sharpie. That's all I want, is just a dot just to identify it, so as I lift it out and drop it on the bench, I can figure out which way in it went. I'm going to lift this piece out now. Now most likely, of course, it's not going to be plain on both surfaces. The other surface has probably got quite a marked shape to it. But without knowing that, so before I took it out, I wouldn't know that. So I'm looking at it closely now. And yes, the surface that went in, the surface towards the front, is convex. The surface at the rear of this was pretty much plain. So that's good. I know the alignment of that part now. It means that I won't bugger it up when I put it back in. At the front, well, I've got a lens spanner here, and there are two notches in the name ring that I can engage with that lens spanner, and that does move. If it's reluctant to move, there's two things that can be causing that to be a problem. The first is that just there's corrosion, or for some other reason this thread is binding. Typically a couple of drops of naphtha or something down the thread around the outside will free that up to a large extent. The other thing that can cause these to be difficult to remove is if the lens has been dropped. If there's any distortion on the outside of the lens, and sometimes it's very hard to see, then that will make it very hard to get a threaded ring like this out of the lens too. I've got a friction tool about the right size, I have. Lift that off. Right, I'll tip this out. Our front glass is convex on the outside, concave on the inside. What have we got? Between the two glass lenses we have this piece. It's got a conical section in there, open towards the front, closed towards the rear. This element, this is two pieces of glass cemented together, very strongly convex towards the front, convex to the front, concave to the rear. So that's good. And then we have the lens body itself. Not much to say about that. Perhaps some very small signs of corrosion in the finish of that anodised aluminium. Otherwise it looks nice and clean. So I want to clean up the body, which basically means giving it a quick wipe. I'm cleaning the thread at the front of that body where that lens name ring goes in. Just a little bit rough in places, that's fine though. That all looks very clean. So I have to clean this glass and get it all back in. There's quite a few marks on this glass. There's even a tiny chip on the edge here. That was possibly always there right from assembly. I'm just running a tweezers round that mount, making sure there's no high spot, something that would cause it to bind into the glass at a point like that. No, that all looks good. So I've got to clean these and then get them back into place. Of course, there's two difficult tasks when cleaning lenses. The first is getting them to be absolutely smear free. It's very easy to clean the glass, and it's easy to leave some tiny smear on there which shows like a rainbow sheen. Typically when you look from the other side of the glass, and typically after you've got the whole thing assembled and you've got to go back in and remove it, and it'll just be some extremely minor sheen of probably some contaminant like an oil or something like that on the glass. So that is certainly a problem. It's hard to get them absolutely clean from that point of view, but you can certainly achieve it. Possibly a more common problem is getting the dust out. When these were assembled, they were probably all assembled in a dust-free environment somewhere with comparatively high humidity, filtered air, all that drama, people wearing white gloves, everything that you've seen before, and that's not happening here. So you will find that it can be very frustrating getting things assembled without trapping a speck of dust between various components. That's something you just have to live with. You just redo the job as many times as you're comfortable redoing it until such stage as you have it to your satisfaction. A little speck of dust really doesn't make any difference in the long run, but it can look unsightly. Some people get very worried about it. Right, I'll clean these pieces of glass next. I'm going to start cleaning up these glass lenses. I'm starting with this piece, and I'm just going to use domestic glass cleaner. And in this case I'm using a very well worn and laundered men's handkerchief, old cotton handkerchief. It's nice and soft. This lens won't need much cleaning, it's just got some surface marking on it. You'll notice I'm using a cotton glove there to save leaving greasy marks on the outside, which will then probably be awkward to move. I'm inspecting the surface of that glass. I've got a microfiber cloth here, just checking there's no marks on it. And this is the inside surface, the one that faces towards the camera. There's a tiny bright spot there. I'm trying to see which surface that's on. I think it's in the cement layer. It's difficult to tell with a convex lens whether you're looking at something on the surface or something inside, or even on the opposite surface. The mark I was seeing is it's like a colour mark, a bit like a coating mark. It looks like it is on this surface, it doesn't come away, so it's a permanent mark, very fine, and shouldn't cause us any grief. That lens is nice and clean. I'm very pleased with the state of that, and I want to fit it to the lens body now. So I'm going to pop my lens up on a rubber thing there. That's it. And see if I can push it into the lens tube without getting any marks on it in the process. That looks good. There's a bit of dust I can see on the inside surface. Yeah, I thought I had clean gloves on, but I've just left a mark on that glass. I'm inspecting that glass in there to see, make sure it's free of dust. There's certainly something on the inside surface that I don't like the look of. I will attempt to clean that again. Yeah, I've still got dust on the inside surface. I'm having trouble seeing the back of that. Yes, that's better. Now our spacer goes in here. Check that that drops down into position. And our front component. The marks that were on the glass in this lens were fairly pronounced, but they all had the look of surface contamination, like droplets almost. Perhaps condensation had formed there. My marks in this case are on the outside surface. Also marks from droplets of moisture are very likely. It probably means that the lens was splashed at some point. Spray perhaps, sea spray, something like that. Rain. Probably even mist would do it. That's not a particularly elegant way to get the lens in place, but it certainly worked. Whoops, and instantly back out again. Unless you get all the dusts and marks off the outside surface, it's very hard to judge whether there are marks on the inside that you could have cleaned. That looks good. I'm pleased with that. So I'll flip the name ring and run that home. Bit reluctant to run down the thread, I'm not sure why that should be. I use a friction tool. Yeah, some binding on that thread. Just a little bit. That's it. You can instantly tell when you're there because there's absolutely no rattle anymore. And I'll just tighten this up very slightly. Never over tighten a retaining ring for a glass lens. There's always a danger, particularly if there was any minor fault with the mount that caused a high spot in the mount, that if you tighten up the glass too much, it could easily cause the glass to crack. That's good. Now the rear lens for this, or the piece of glass for the rear of this section, we identified the surface that went to the rear. Because we know it was the convex side to the front of the lens and the plane side to the rear of the lens. We marked the rear side carefully before I lifted the glass out to make sure that there was no problem. There's certainly marks on here. They're coating marks, appear on the rearmost surface. They have the form of tiny droplets perhaps have been there. So condensation would certainly be a possible culprit. I can still see the mark that I made on there, but of course I don't need to worry about that because that'll be covered by the retaining ring. The mark I mean that I made with the Sharpie to identify which surface was supposed to be to the back. That retaining ring will not go in any further by hand. Let's just use the friction tool. That's it. So I have that lens as clean as it's going to be. The marks that are left are here to stay. That certainly shouldn't cause any problem in use. That part's done. And our rear group that goes into the mount here needs to be cleaned. This is a nice small lens, of course, so it's easy to deal with cotton buds. And not having acres of glass to deal with also makes it much easier to get it clean and without any flecks of dust appearing on the surface. Just because there's less acreage of glass for dust to settle on. It appears good. And run that down onto the lens body there, or the capsule body, and just friction tool to run that into place. That's nice and clean. So we're just about at the stage where things can be assembled. I want to assemble my lens capsule into the body now, so I've removed the outer focus ring component. We've got a couple of tasks to achieve when we do this. We have to line up the aperture, the diaphragm opening fork has to line up with the tab in the lens mount, and likewise this tab here, this groove here, lines up with the post inside here. That stops that body from revolving. And I am fairly confident that's going to give me grief coupling that aperture up, so I'm going to cheat by putting a cotton bud into the diaphragm to hold it very slightly open while I couple things up. And now I just have to get it to couple to two places at once, which is always entertaining. Typically you want to try and get your aperture coupled to the lever that opens it. It is. And then rotate the lens into the body so that it drops into place. And there we have it. I can open and close the aperture. The lens capsule is dropped back into the body and it's aligned correctly. Now we can run our front focus, the outer focus ring into place. That should rotate. That's just like that's good. I'm turning my focus mount to the infinity position turning my focus ring in here so that the lens is just pulled back in slightly. And now I install our washers, screws and washers that held all this together. Just run the screws down, not over tightening it at this stage. I've got to focus the lens correctly. That's done by adjusting the relative position of the outer focus ring here with our focus scale ring. And of course you can only judge that when the lens is assembled. So there's a lot of toing and froing at this stage. Checking that my focus mount revolves through its entire normal focus range. That seems good. And drop the spacer in here. Screw the front section of the lens into place. Just do that up finger tight, needs no more than that. And now I'm going to mount this to a camera and check my focus and find out how accurate I am, or otherwise. The infinity focus on a ground glass screen is correct for an infinity target when our focus scale ring is pointing at 60 meters there. So I need to carefully remove the lens, loosen my 3 screws holding the focus scale ring to the outer focus ring, making sure the outer focus ring doesn't move. Revolve my focus scale ring round to the infinity stop, retighten my 3 screws, I'm not tightening, going mad tightening those up either. I'm just getting them snugged up so they won't move while I'm testing this. Fit this piece back in place. Now there's a little tab on this ring, it only fits in one spot. Run my lens back on. Snug that up lightly, finger tight. Check my focus again. An infinity target focuses correctly when the pointer here is right at the front of the infinity symbol there. So I'm almost there but slightly off. So I've got to remove the lens and adjust it slightly more. So close but no cigar. Loosen my 3 screws. They are loose here. Carefully holding the outer focus ring so it doesn't move. Move my focus scale ring to the stop. Do up my 3 screws. And this time it should be bang on the money. And this time everything is correct. So unscrew that lens once more. Lift out that ring. Final tighten to the 3 screws. We're not going in there again. Blow out any dust. Fit our spacer ring again, getting the notch aligned carefully. Blow any last dust off the back of the lens. Tighten the lens. Rack the focus out to the close focus position. Tighten our 3 lock screws. Check the action. That's nice and smooth. Yes, I've managed to do that without applying any more fingerprints to the lens. Check that the rear of the lens is nice and clean too. And that lens has been serviced. So there we have it. Retina-Tele-Xenar f4 135mm Schneider cruise neck for a retina reflex S3, 4, retina 3S rangefinder or Instamatic reflex. With a little bit of work you could use it on other cameras with a decal mount. What comes to mind, Voigtlander Bessamatics. They're keyed slightly differently, but a little bit of work with a Dremel, you can alter the mount in the Bessamatic so that it'll accept the Kodak lenses. Likewise, you can modify the Kodak lens so it would fit the Bessamatic mount. Glad to have that one out the way.